Today we have Professor Bindu M. Kutty, MD, PhD. She is a professor in charge, Human Sleep and Cognition Research Laboratory, and in charge of NIMHANS Center for Consciousness Studies. NIMHANS, as you know, is a very famous National Institute of Mental Health and Neurosciences, and is in Bangalore. Recently, they started a Center for Consciousness Studies, and Professor Bindu Kutty, who is the professor in the Department of Neurophysiology, has been given charge of this center. And we have entered into a memorandum of understanding with the Consciousness Studies Center at NIMHANS. And today she'll be speaking about consciousness studies in general all over the world, particularly initiatives at NIMHANS and the perspectives and challenges of this emerging field for consciousness studies. There was a time that neurophysiologists used to frown at the word consciousness. Now, no more. They have accepted there is consciousness apart from the mind and the body and the neurons, and a lot of interest has been generated in the Western world in consciousness studies. So we have Professor Bindu Kutty to speak on consciousness. Please.
Thank you. Shall I share my slides?
Yes, please. Yes, you can share.
It's visible, no?
Yeah. It's visible.
Yeah. Greetings from Bangalore and good evening. Thank you, Swami Atmapriyananda, for giving me this particular topic, for involving me to give a talk, as well as to giving me this particular topic, the importance of consciousness studies, the new initiative by NIMHANS, perspective and challenges. So here, I am not actually, talking anything about the other consciousness studies happening elsewhere. We thought we will just share with you what is our journey in this studies, and that culminated in getting the Center for Consciousness Studies, and now the challenges ahead of us. I hope I will be able to convince you in this in my talk. So I would like to bring two concepts about brain. One is that adult human brain is highly plastic in nature, and that the brain functions are quite dynamic, and that is because the brain circuitry can be, reorganized. The brain can reorganize its circuitry as a result of experience. So experience can be from inside, or even it can be from outside, like external experience, like learning, or even meditation practices. Internal experiences, it can be even due to stress or any other sensory experience. So this is one aspect, that the brain is highly dynamic in nature, and that is how Charles Sherrington, he is a British neurophysiologist, he has used this famous metaphor for brain, the enchanted loom, just to explain about this phenomena of neuroplasticity. And another important aspect of brain is that it's very intriguing that we human beings are endowed with many virtues, many inner virtues, and manifestation of these virtues definitely make him to be an integral human being, or an or an excellent human being from an ordinary human being. So how that is possible? So that is possible because we possess an highly evolved brain. It's not only just to possess an evolved brain; it has the evolved mechanism to generate complex behaviors, higher behavioral attributes like compassion, generosity, altruism, ethics, morality, and so on. So you see that basically our brain is a cognitive brain and an emotional brain. It is not a compassionate brain or a moral brain. But these are evolved from, from the existing brain circuitry itself. So that means through experience, this brain circuitry undergoes various changes even the changes in the properties of the circuitry as well as neural substrate. And thus now it is able to, generate these mechanisms, these behaviors, either the compassion behavior or moral behavior. So you see the brain has all these capacities. So it is up to us how to manifest this during our lifetime. So these are the two interesting aspects we neuroscientists are intrigued to know more about brain, human brain behavior, mind, and consciousness. And another important aspect we are intrigued about consciousness is, as I have already discussed with you this, in my last talk also, we neuroscientists have got a very small window to understand consciousness, especially from a neurobiological perspective. So if you look at it from that perspective, definitely consciousness is a neurophysiological, neurobiological phenomenon, and conscious experience is based on the property of the brain network activities. So very narrow window we have got to understand this phenomenon. And it is intriguing that each experience is an independent entity. This is because both our qualities of our conscious experience as well as the content of information processing varies across individuals. So that is also very intriguing. So that means, it is so important to study consciousness. Just to study how the neural mechanisms are associated with these kind of qualities, as well as the human subjective awareness, feelings, and experiences. And only one consolation for us is that both our experience and the corresponding brain processes can be studied. Thus, we have some hope that now neural correlates of consciousness or human agency is possible to study using appropriate methodologies. So that is only consolation, and so that will give us a lot of impetus that okay, it is intriguing to study consciousness, and it is even for neuroscientists also it is possible to study consciousness. So this is the background how we started our studies in way back in 1975. Our Department of Neurophysiology is established in 1975, and by Professor P. Desiraju. He was a world-renowned neurophysiologist, and he was an eminent neurophysiologist, and he was the only one who was talking about the neurophysiological basis of consciousness. And he has started studies on meditation, pranayama, and also neuropsychophysiological aspects of yogic practices in health and diseases. So he was able to establish the department, able to establish various laboratories, and he has initiated studies, and that culminated in 3 theses. One is neurophysiological investigation on meditation, study of neurophysiology of pranayamas, and the psychophysiological aspects of yogic practices in human in health and diseases. And the untimely death of Professor Desiraju in 1992, stopped almost all studies on consciousness in the department until our team started taking the studies in 2000. And in 2000 till now, we have been looking into various aspects of neurophysiological correlates of meditation. It's not exactly, neurophysiological aspects of consciousness and meditation. It is purely neurophysiological correlates of meditation we were looking into. And we have initiated our studies on sleep, how meditation influences sleep organization. That was our interest, and to get some answers from our studies. And we have initiated our studies using practitioners of Vipassana meditation. And definitely we have conducted many studies on, on sleep. And these studies helped us to understand that meditation practice helps to preserve a proper sleep organization. This is very intriguing that because human sleep architecture is very stable in nature. So what actually the meditation practice can, further do for sleep organization? That was our question. But for our dismay, we have observed that Vipassana meditation helps to enhance the various sleep stages, the deep sleep state as well as REM sleep state, with reduced intermittent awakenings. So the sleep was very smooth, and slow wave sleep was preserved even among older adults. Because usually in normal condition, sleep undergoes age-associated changes in quality, and that you can see by the age of 15 itself. But we have seen here, even among older adults, the slower sleep was preserved. And we have also observed a very enhanced proper REM sleep organization. This is so important because REM sleep, a lot of neuroplastic events happens. So that means maybe meditation practices help in inducing various aspects of plasticity during REM sleep. And we have also studied various other aspects like whether there is any, like meditation has enhanced the serum melatonin and DHEA levels. These are two hormones which are very important hormones. We call it as feel-good hormones. Feel-good hormones are important to make to make us feel happy throughout the day, make us feel motivated and reward-seeking in nature. So these feel-good hormones also have got they are very important to maintain sleep. So we have seen that these two hormone levels are increased among the practitioners, and also we have observed improved cardio-autonomic function during sleep. This is also so important. That means meditation practice help in establishing proper visceral synchrony during sleep. This is very important. That it is very important for the proper cardiac health. And also we have seen various other aspects of the mitigation of age-associated changes in sleep quality. So in general, we have observed that sleep enhances proper sleep, helps to establish, meditation helps to establish a proper sleep organization. And this we have studied using meditation practitioners of Vipassana meditation. And once we have completed, our question was that what else we can study using, like to look at the effect of meditation on sleeping brain dynamics. This is because, and what we have observed, what we have done, we have just applied, we have used some auditory stimulations throughout sleeping. So we have just presented the subject with some auditory stimulations of these characteristics, and throughout the sleep. Usually brain has the habit of processing this sensory information and process this information. So that means it enhances, it helps to enhance our sensory experience. But this is happening during sleep. So whether during sleep, whether this kind of information, the brain is able to process this information. So that was the question. And if it is processing the information, we will get some potentials like this. This is called as sleep ERPs. So this was our aim, that let us study the sleep ERPs among meditators while they are sleeping. And why we are interested, because usually during deep sleep, during slow wave sleep, we see that there are mechanisms which prevent the brain from processing sensory information. So that means there are various very stable cortical gating mechanism that prevents all processing of all sensory information. And it will be just only the brain mechanism we can see is that that mediates sleep, that ensures a proper sleep. Whereas here, what we have observed among the meditators that some of these events, especially the evoked K complexes, these are examples, these are brain potentials which are very important for ensuring a proper sleep. So we have observed enhanced evoked K complexes. That is, these K complexes are evoked by this sensory stimulation as well as sleep ERPs. Very high sleep ERPs we have observed among the meditators. And also we have observed some of the areas of DMN, especially the anterior region of the DMN, that is default mode network, is also highly active during stimulation. And this activity in turn actually enhances the development of EKCs and sleep ERPs. So that means all these mechanisms are very important, that they are enhanced, they are indicators of cortical gating mechanism to ensure stable sleep. So these are all the mechanisms that ensure stable sleep. But in addition, to our dismay, we have observed that there is an enhanced activity of DMN and amygdala, right insula. So we have observed there is enhanced activation of DMN and insula at a particular EEG waves like theta activity. So this was, we never expected this actually, because usually during sleep, all these areas are highly inactive. You can see a decoupling of these areas. But here now you can see a coupling of these areas. There is an enhanced activity happening. That is because of the stimulation. And these areas are associated with processing the information regarding sense of self, sensory processing, etc. So that means whether these kind of experiment will help us to understand whether in meditators, whether these areas will be able to process sensory information during sleep. So now we have got a window to understand this, to further study these aspects. Now we have, in addition to sleep studies, we have also carried out various other brain activity studies associated with the meditation practices. So for this, we have used, we have carried out these studies not only using Vipassana meditation practitioners, but also Brahma Kumaris, then Isha meditation, then also mindfulness meditation. And we have seen so beautiful brain oscillations among the senior and teachers, senior meditators. That means these meditators are having more than 10 years of meditation experience. And you see that you can even, with your naked eye, you can see this enhanced brain oscillation. Whereas novice meditators who have got less than 1 year of experience, they don't show such beautiful brain oscillations. They show only very desynchronized EEG wave pattern. So these brain oscillations across brain regions, we have used more than 128 channels from different brain regions in the scalp, and we have seen almost all areas are highly, showing highly oscillating events. So what it could be? What is the reason? And studies have shown that, see, this when brain is highly integrated. So these oscillations are indications that brain is highly integrated. So we mean that when brain is highly integrated, that means brain areas are highly connected with each other. And when the brain areas are connected with each other, they give rise to this kind of very, synchronized wave patterns. So these synchronized wave patterns are indications of, the meditation practice proficiency helps you to reach a state of ecstasy. Meditation induced the ecstatic or blissful state of consciousness. And also during meditation, from the resting state, they are entering into a different state of meditation altogether. And we have seen two different types, like the trait effect of meditation as well as the state effect of meditation. Trait effect is a permanent change in the brain activity that you can study even during rest period, not necessarily during meditation itself. And this is about enhanced theta alpha, that is enhanced brain oscillation at this frequency level, that is 6 to 10 hertz level. So these are indications of like attaining different mental attributes like sustained attention and awareness, positive emotion, feeling of happiness and bliss, and enhanced self-regulation. So you see that the beginners, it is an effortful state of meditation, whereas the senior meditators, they are able to effortlessly do meditation practice and enter into a heightened state of mental attributes, and that is you are seeing the behavioral changes as well as you are seeing the brain concomitant changes in the brain activity itself. The state effect also same thing, like we have seen the state effect at different states of meditation. Like as you know that Vipassana meditation, there are 3 different meditation practices they do. They start the meditation with Anapana, then continue the meditation with the Vipassana, and end the meditation with the Metta Bhavana. So here you can see that this there is enhanced alpha frequency of 8 to 10 hertz during Anapana and Vipassana, and this is an indication of an internalized attention and blocking all other irrelevant sensory information processing. So this is a kind of like even during meditation, they can block the cortex from processing the sensory information. That is, they are channelizing all their attention towards the internalized attention, the meditation related internalized attention. And this is because the Anapana and Vipassana, the behaviorally also, they are cognitively intense state. There is enhanced attention, enhanced awareness during this. And that is very important for having this internalized attention. Whereas Metta is a highly emotionally intense meditation state where the meditators are able to generate loving loving kindness meditation. They generate a positive energy towards oneself as well as to others. And here we have seen a change, like the brain activity has been changed to this frequency from 8 to 10 to 6 to 8 hertz. And these are real indicators of meditation, especially the mental quiescence and emotion regulation associated with meditation and the enhancement of purposeful attention and engagement. So you see that along with the behavioral trait, we are able to see the concomitant changes in the brain activity. And this also indicates that they are entering into different states of consciousness. We are yet to understand these aspects later. And when we have studied the same, studies, when we have conducted the same studies, that brain activity studies during meditation among Brahmakumari's Raja Yoga meditators, we have almost observed the same trend that long-term meditators, that is those proficient meditators who have got more than 10,000 hours of meditation practice, have shown they were able to robustly shift states, that is states from rest period to meditation period, and to stay in that meditation period for a period of 1 minute. So this is actually a just a minute meditation study we have conducted. In this just a minute meditation, they are able to enter into the meditation state, and along with that concomitant change in the brain activity, that is enhancement of theta power. Whereas short-term meditators had limited ability as well as controls, they couldn't shift states. So these are all indications that the long-term meditators, they were able to enter into that state of meditation very easily, effortlessly, and with concomitant changes in the brain, in the brain activity. And the theta synchrony, as I have mentioned, it is associated with the purposeful attention and engagement, mental quiescent, and emotion regulation. Among the Vipassana meditators, we have also carried out various cognitive studies to look at the brain dynamicity associated with the cognition, and we could see the same kind of contrasting changes in meditation, in brain activity across meditation proficiency. I'm not going into the details. So from there, we also, and we have also conducted, we wanted to study whether these meditation practices, especially the proficient meditation practices, enhance well-being. So here, well-being means well-being can be it's an umbrella term. So when we talk about well-being, well-being can be a hedonic well-being. In that aspect, we will be studying the like the state of happiness, the state of being happy. So that's a kind of well-being. Whereas in this kind, in the proficient meditators, we mean that their growth, their proficient, their growth in that meditation proficiency, their environmental mastery. So when these proficient meditators, when they have been doing meditation for the past more than 10 years, they are able to bring significant change in the property of the brain functions itself, brain network itself. So, and that leads to, leads to the expansion of various mental attributes, like as I have mentioned that experiencing compassion, experiencing generosity, and so on. So these are also different aspects of well-being when we talk. So we have carried out studies just to correlate whether well-being is correlated with proficiency or only duration of meditation. And we have observed that well-being is directly correlated with meditation proficiency rather than duration of meditation. So that itself tells that your growth, your proficient growth in meditation is very important for you to achieve these higher mental attributes. So we have looked at various questionnaires to study the proficiency in spiritual study, meditation experience, and their development of virtues and service orientation, and so on. So we have seen that these meditation practitioners, especially the proficient meditation practitioners, they are able to definitely they have shown some concomitant changes in the brain activity, and it is that brain activity that helps them to experience these higher or manifest these higher mental attributes. We have also studied the same thing among heartfulness meditators, but the tradition is different, the practice is different. Here it is a contrasting this thing we have observed. We didn't see a meditation associated concomitant change in the brain activity as such, whereas we have observed an association between meditation proficiency and enhanced well-being among meditators. So you see that the different meditation practices or meditation traditions help us to understand various aspects of consciousness, various aspects of brain mechanisms, and their association between well-being and cognition. It is so intriguing. So we have now reached this state. We thought, okay, we have to now look into. So we have now got quite a lot of experience in understanding neuroplasticity as well as neurophysiology of meditation. So we were thinking that now this is the time for us now to enter into or to undertake hardcore studies on consciousness. So this is where we have tried for the Center for Consciousness Center with a vision of to become a global center of excellence in consciousness studies and a mission of to build a platform for world-class multidisciplinary research in the domains of science, humanities, and culture pertaining to consciousness by integrating Indian philosophical wisdom with neuroscience. It is our endeavor to understand, to bridge the gap between philosophy and neuroscience, at least in certain areas where we also will be able to contribute something about consciousness, and we will also be able to compare our understanding with that of the philosophical understanding on consciousness, and definitely to provide leadership in the domains of mind, brain, self, and consciousness. And with that aim, we have submitted the proposal to the Ministry, Health and Family Welfare, and we have got the center, established the center in the midst of COVID actually. So because of the COVID, we were not able to initiate any studies because it is we have to carry out all studies on human being, human subjects, and so we are yet to start our studies. But this time we have utilized it very effectively to consolidate the objectives, and also we have standardized certain techniques to study directly about the neurobiology of consciousness. And so the objectives of the center include neurobiology of sleep, dream, and consciousness, neurobiology of meditation, cognition, and consciousness, neurophenomenology of yoga, well-being, and consciousness, and disorders of consciousness. So our interest is to understand consciousness from an illness to wellness spectrum, because we have also carried out a lot of studies on disorders of consciousness, especially to understand the neurobiology of schizophrenia, neurobiology of various other neurodegenerative disorders, sleep disorders, and so on. So with these objectives, one of our important objectives is to understand looking the consciousness from the perspective of a sleeping brain, neurobiology of sleep, dream, and consciousness. And especially in this, we have two objectives. One is to understand the neural basis of deep sleep phenomenology. This is quite intriguing and quite challenging for us because deep sleep state, during deep sleep state, the sleep quality is actually determined by the deep sleep state, and during deep sleep states, the sensory inputs are insulated from being processed to have a conscious experience. So during deep sleep state, there is no conscious experience because brain is not in a condition, in a state, brain is not in a state to process any conscious experience. So how do you know that, deep sleep state, how do you study consciousness? But it is very imperative to study consciousness, especially the neural correlates of consciousness, because we always report that I had a refreshing sleep subsequent to wake. So we had this experience. We have experienced that we had a quality sleep in the previous night, and that you are able to report during subsequent to wake. So that is how it is possible. That is possible only only through memory mechanism, only through neural mechanisms. So now this is what now Ravindra will be undertaking these studies very extensively. We feel that during any time of the state of consciousness, whether it is waking consciousness or sleeping consciousness, there are ultradian rhythm brain activities in a very ultra slow rhythms, less than 0.01 hertz, you can see. So these rhythms may be very important to integrate this cardiorespiratory integration with the default mode network and insula. It is a Herculean task, but we are now designing some approaches to understand it, to take up the study, to look at this cardiorespiratory or visceral functions, especially cardiorespiratory functions, and look at the default mode network and insula to understand that is there any neural mechanism to experience the quality of sleep associated, during deep sleep state. And this is one, excuse me. And this is one area I think the neuroscientists and philosophers will be able to jointly study these aspects of deep sleep phenomenology, because Vedantic school of Indian philosophy also highlights about these memory processes associated with the sleep and associated with the verbal reporting of having a refreshing sleep, and that could be the recollection of memory processes. So there could be some memory processes, and with appropriate methodologies, we should be in a position to understand the neural mechanisms of these memory processes that help us to experience sleep and help us to report that we had a refreshing sleep in the subsequent to a week. So you see that this is one of our area we are thinking of collaborating with Vivekananda Center for Consciousness Studies, and we should be able to contribute a lot in this area. And this definitely Ravindra will be taking up these studies, and definitely we will be keeping in touch with the tender for not only getting various experimental evidences, but also even the philosophical concepts, what is given in the ancient texts. So if we are able to study these, we will be in a better position to understand this phenomenon, and we will be able to contribute about the neural correlates of consciousness from a sleeping brain perspective. So this is one area we are interested to continue our research, initiate our studies, and contribute to the understanding of neurobiology of consciousness from a sleeping brain perspective. Another area is, again, from sleeping perspective only, especially the neurophysiology and phenomenology of dreaming. This is also very important as far as the neurobiology of consciousness is concerned, because now we know more about the various aspects of dreaming during REM sleep, especially about lucid dreaming as well as non-lucid aspects of dreaming. So you can have both non-lucid dreaming as well as lucid dreaming during REM sleep, and these two are actually bring two different aspects of consciousness experience. That is, lucid dreaming is happening during, we are aware of dreaming. So lucid dreaming, we are aware of dreaming, we are able to change the content of dreaming. Whereas in non-lucid dreaming, you are not aware of dreaming. Sometimes if that non-lucid dreaming happening during the early morning, you are able to recollect, at least you had a dream. But lucid dreaming is, you are aware of the dreaming and you are able to change, bring changes in the content of the dream. And also studies have shown that non-lucid, like lucid dreaming is associated with increased activity of the frontal areas of the brain. So frontal areas which are associated with the central executive functioning, especially like logical reasoning, voluntary behavior, and so on, memory, concentration, attention, all these various higher aspects of brain functions. Usually during REM sleep stage, these frontal areas of the brain are totally deactivated. That is why we are having vivid dreams. We are not able to, recollect also it properly because these areas are highly deactivated. But during lucid dreaming state, you can see that activation of these areas, and also increased gamma activity, gamma brain activity is associated with the binding of information and into an integrated consciousness. So you see that these are all possible for us to study during lucid dreaming, as well as there are lucid dreaming is associated with enhanced prefrontal cortex and the precuneate activity, which are associated with the areas associated with the self-referential processing and sense of agency. So you see that lucid dreaming will definitely studying lucid dreaming. It will provide us new insights into neuroscience of consciousness, and also help us to understand what characterizes and maintains this heightened consciousness and how it emerges. So we are interested to see all these, and definitely along with like in meditators. So we have actually carried out a pilot study on lucid dreaming using normal control human subjects, non-meditating human subjects. So we have initiated the study. We have already completed a pilot study on this, and we have a methodology to study lucid state during sleep. And now we will be in a, we also have started now we have started studying the neurophysiology and phenomenology of dreaming among non-meditators actually. So these two studies have been already initiated. Lucid dreaming pilot study has been completed. We are entering into this. Plus, we will be also looking into these using meditation practitioners. So this part we are yet to start, especially using meditation practitioners. But the other using non-meditation practitioners, we have already started understanding the neural correlates of dreaming. And one more thing I just wanted to emphasize here is we are now. So our ultimate neuroscientist ultimate aim is to understand the brain integration as well as differentiation. How brain is able to differentiate, or how brain is able to differentiate various experiences, like and also integration. So these are the two ultimate important objectives we need to understand. Now we have enough methodological tools to carry out these studies. And in collaboration with Dr. Srivas from Cambridge, UK, we were in a position to understand some aspects, especially the brain connectivity analysis among senior meditators as well as among novice meditators. And you see that meditators, meditation practice, especially long-term meditation practice, enhances brain connectivity. And this connectivity we have studied in alpha frequency. So you look at now the complexities. You are looking at the connectivity at a different brain frequency level, and these kind of studies definitely. So these efficient neural processing, network processing, especially associated with meditation, lead to mental clarity, enhanced intellect, cultivation of higher virtues and wholesome behaviors. So these are all our proposals, but we are, now we are in a position to carry out all these aspects. And now we have to, so since these techniques are with us now, we are in a position now to design specific tasks to assess the mental states, especially the phenomenologically rich mental states associated with the meditation. So this we are yet to start, but we have already discussed, and we have some technique in our hand. With that technique, we are in a position to study the implicit, inherent binding about self as well as emotions. We are yet to start the experiments, but we are into it now. Now coming to the neurophenomenology of yoga, well-being, and consciousness. Our aim is to understand the core concepts of yoga with modern neuroscience approaches. Like three concepts. One is like we talk about that yoga helps us to attain equanimity, as Samatvam Yoga, Uchidev, as says in Bhagavad Gita. So we just want to trust this aspect, whether by using MRI studies. Especially we know that these people with yoga expertise will have the capacity to engage with positivity and disengage from negativity in the context of self. So we are very positive that we will be able to study these aspects using yogic practitioners. And another idea is studying the neural signatures of meditative mind. That's what we have been doing. But the study these in multiple times to study that whether the neural phenomenon are consistent along with the behaviors. This is also very important, and across meditation tradition. And another idea is to understand the neural correlates of ultimate state of reality. Especially, we are not very sure of this Surya state in yoga. People talk about this, but we are yet to get people having this experience. But we are sure that we get Buddhist monks having, excuse me. Sorry. So, in Buddhist monks, uh, um, uh, we are very, optimistic that we will be able to continue the studies on Shunya or emptiness meditation, because already we had some discussion with some of the monasteries, and they were willing to help us to study these aspects. So in addition, we also wanted to develop and validate questionnaires from each meditation tradition to assess meditation proficiency and progress in well-being. So these are also very important. So these are our future plans. And as I have mentioned that we have also carried out many studies to look at the neurobiology of, taking various disease conditions like schizophrenia, insomnia, other neurodegenerative disorders like in spinocerebellar ataxia. So we have got a certain understanding about this. So now from this sleeping disorders and disorders of consciousness, we will be able to study, especially to look at the deep sleep phenomenology, lucid dreaming, and disorders of cognition and consciousness. So I just wanted to wind up here that the one of the important aspect of human brain is that we are in a position, to change the brain perspective, that is the brain properties from a cognitive and emotional brain to a compassionate brain. That is possible with meditation. Even see, for example, FM theta. FM theta is can be generated. These kind of studies can be possible only with long-term meditators. And FM theta is the theta originated from the frontal midline areas of the brain. And these are indications of internalized attention and positive emotional experience. So you see that brain has the capability to change its properties, its strategies as a result of experience. And even there are studies to show that experience meditation enhances areas like anterior insula. These are associated with the compassion meditation, compassion. So you see that the brain has the capacity or it has got all the evolved mechanism to generate or to accommodate the various higher behaviors like compassion, generosity, altruism, and so on. So these give us a lot of optimism that we are in a position now to look at, to undertake more studies, especially using meditation practitioners, and try to understand the neurobiology of consciousness in a focused way. And with this, keeping this in mind, we have got some MOU with some research collaboration we have initiated with Liège University, Belgium. So these people, especially, and also Srivas Chennu, they are quite good in neural network processing and graph theory analysis and all. So we have, with this collaboration, definitely we learn from them, and we will be able to contribute in a much better way towards understanding the neurobiology of consciousness, especially in meditation. And also we have initiated, we have collaboration with Vivekananda Center for Consciousness Studies. And here we are thinking of having these two, understanding deep sleep phenomenology from philosophical and neuroscience perspective, as well as neuroscientific and philosophical perspectives on dreams. So these are our future plans, and I hope that this collaboration definitely will help us enrich us to understand the phenomenology first, and then to understand the empirical basis of this phenomenology. Thank you so much for your attention. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to share our ideas, and looking forward to work with the Vivekananda Center for Consciousness Studies on various aspects of consciousness. Thank you so much.
Oh, hey, Kurache. Hey. So thank you so much, Professor Bindukutti, for a simple, excellent presentation and what you are trying to do, what you can do. But the Turiya state and Shunya state, etc., are not easy to. You can't find. If you had Professor Ramana Maharshi, for example, he was the last person, authentic person, as far as I know. There's so many gurus now claim so many. There's one question which is being read out to you.
So this is a question by Dr. Partha Ghosh. What is the explanation of connected consciousness as Swami Vivekananda felt about some calamity at a far place from where he was talking? Can consciousness stay without body, sometimes connected through meditation, or is the process of individual brain only?
Everything is correct, actually. Even consciousness, see, I talked from the perspective of an individual brain, actually speaking. But that is what I said, that from a neuroscientific point of view, we only can talk about this actually from this smaller. But from a larger perspective, it is the whole universe is consciousness. From that perspective, from like from an individual to universal consciousness, definitely that is possible. See, for example, now I will give you an example. Even neuroscientists also in a position to look at the inter-brain synchrony, actually. Inter-brain synchrony between the two people who are sitting in two different part of the country. We are also planning to study this. I didn't mention that because we have not yet thought about it. We only just, talked about studying this inter-brain synchrony within the lab condition. But these are all highly possible because we neuroscientists are only touching the tip of an iceberg. So whatever I have talked is only from that individual brain perspective. But probably Swami Atmapriyananda will be able to throw light on this aspect from a philosophical point of view.
Philosophical and a spiritual point of view,
Yes.
there is interconnectedness everywhere.
Yes.
Swami Vivekananda talked about in one of the lectures in Colombo, Tulmora, in the Madras lecture. He says, I did not tell you, the graduates in the Madras presidency, how everything is interconnected. Even physically, we are one, he says. Although Einstein's relativity theory had not come by that time, he says, my body, your body, all of them are whirlpools in the infinite ocean of matter. So our body is a parts of the infinite ocean of matter. Our minds are part of the cosmic mind. Our spirit are the cosmic spirit. So he talked about three kinds of monism in his famous lecture on Hinduism in the Chicago Parliament of Religions. He talks about materialistic monism, philosophical monism, and spiritual monism. It's a very fantastic idea that monism or Advaita Vedanta can be of three dimensions. Even at the physical dimension, there is oneness. At the mental dimension, there is oneness. And of course, the spiritual dimension, the Atma Brahma Aikya equation. And Carl Jung, the famous psychologist, was a disciple of Freud who broke away from Freud, had initiated a project with the famous Nobel laureate physicist Wolfgang Pauli. Pauli is a genius in physics. They initiated a project on Hiranyagarbha on the cosmic mind. That project was not completed. And Carl Jung was very much fascinated with the idea that our minds are all interconnected. This can easily see from the connectivity. Now, all of us are now connected to what is known as internet, WWW, which is World Wide Web. World Wide Web is not only the cyberspace, World Wide Web is even the philosophical, mental space and the spiritual space. So the Indian philosophical wisdom talks about three kinds of space. The physical space called the Mahakasha, the mental space called Chitta Akasha, and then the spiritual space which is called Chidakasha. Chidakasha is called Chidambaram. In the southern part of India, there is a temple, Chidambaram temple. Ambara means Akasha. Chid Akasha, Chidambaram, means the consciousness space. Ultimately, consciousness operates through the body at the physical level, through the mind at the mental level, at the higher level, directly through consciousness. So in that sense, there is a complete oneness which can be felt even at the physical level by great yogis like Vivekananda and Ramakrishna. Actually, in the case of Ramakrishna, there is a story that the two boatmen were quarreling, and one of them severely beat the other, as Ramakrishna felt terrible pain at the back, somebody is beating him. So such experiences are possible. It is called in Gita, Sarva Bhutatma Bhutatma. That means he becomes the self of all beings. And therefore, he sees through all beings, the eyes of all beings. He hears through the ears of all beings. He walks through the feet of all beings and so on. Sarvata Panipadam Tat Sarvadokshiro Mukham Sarvata Shrudimalloke Sarvam Avritta Tishtati. These are shlokas which have been experienced by a great man.
Yeah, even we talk in terms of telepathy, like, the friends sometimes think about themselves, even though they are sitting, kilometers apart. They will be thinking about the same aspects. So definitely there are, the interconnectivity across people. Even the neuroscientists, that's what this inner brain coupling, then now there are few studies on inner brain coupling. So this is an opportunity for us to understand this phenomenon.
Quantum mechanics talks about quantum entanglement. How two electrons which are far away can see what they feel, see, and react to what the other electron is feeling. This is what is happening when I am sitting here in Calcutta and you are sitting in Bangalore. Somebody is listening from somewhere. We are all interconnected. That's a kind of coupling. This is a telepathy. Telepathy is nothing very strange. If we did not have the mechanism, did not have the interconnectivity, did not have any internet, even then we are connected.
Connected, yes.
Well, unfortunately, since we do not have that level of consciousness, we need the interconnectivity and we need the Google and so on.
And even see, for example, now if we record our own brain activity, it will be our same activity you will be able to record.
Yeah.
So that is the coupling, actually. That's the beauty of interconnectivity.
In fact, it is well known that a mother feels the feelings of the child, even though the child may be far away, even though the child does not think of the mother. So the mother unconscious, that's kind of, there's a coupling which takes place at the emotional level. So the idea of the macrocosm and the microcosm, which is basic to Indian philosophy and science, the Veshti and Samashti, the individual mind is part of the cosmic mind. One is the individual microcosmic, other the macrocosmic. The individual consciousness, therefore, the Jiva consciousness, the I consciousness, is part of the collective consciousness of all humanity. In fact, Jung came up with the idea of collective unconscious. The famous theory by Jung, the collective unconscious theory, He says every country, every nation, every group has a collective unconscious. The collective unconscious is awakened, the whole nation awakens. One famous example of this is Ramayana. Years ago, many of you will know, the Ramayana serial was being shown at 9 o'clock in the morning on Sundays. The entire country,
Ah,
those days of 120 crore of people, there's pin drop silence, not a single person in the street. Everybody was glued to the television. So much so there is an incident. A very urgent defense meeting was called by the minister at 9 o'clock. Nobody turned up. At 10, everybody came. That means Ramayana, Rama and Krishna, Samad Buddha, and in the Western world, the Christ and so on, they are all in the collective unconscious. The moment you stir that, the entire consciousness of the whole nation wakes up as one man. That's why religious feelings are so powerful. Once you arouse a religious feeling, the whole clan, the whole country, the whole group, whole society rises as one man. Because it is deep into the unconscious mind. It's called the collective unconscious. It's a famous theory by Carl Jung. What we call the Hiranyagarbha, which is the cosmic mind, is also the collective superconscious. Swami Vivekananda for the first time introduced the idea of superconscious. He said there's an unconscious, conscious, subconscious of Freud. He said India discovered long ago that there is a superconscious beyond consciousness.
So this question was not read out, but perhaps it was already answered.
Yeah, no, she read it. She saw that. So thank you so much for your very interesting talk and making it so lucid and taking it forward. Consciousness is a great mystery. And the most important thing about consciousness is it's about ourselves.
yes. Understanding ourselves.
We are the consciousness, and therefore the difficulty about study of consciousness is we are studying ourselves. And we can't study ourselves as an object. That is a big constraint in the study of consciousness, the way that being attempted by you, by so many consciousness studies, people with instruments and so on, because it is not an object of study. It is an eternal subject. Can the subject study itself? Is a big question which has been asked in the Upanishads. Vijñātāramare kena vijāniyāt. Who can know the knower? The knower knows everything which is known, but who will know the knower? So he says, Swayameva Atmanatmanam Nittatvam Purushottama. The knower has to fall back upon himself to know his own consciousness. And therefore, there's a theory, particularly the Buddhism, says consciousness is like an ocean, and the curls in consciousness, the waves of consciousness, are the known on the one side and the knower on the other side. Gyata and the Geya, the knower and the known, are by the curls in the infinite ocean of consciousness, which is called the Jnana. So this is the fundamental basis of the Buddhistic Vipassana meditation. Rather than concentrating on the knower and asking who is the knower, or the known and asking what is the known which we see, concentrate only upon the knowledge itself, jnana, per se, realizing that the knower and the known are but the curls of the infinite consciousness, which is jnana, or the knowledge itself. So Vipassana just tapered with the knowledge. Very similar to what Jay Krishnamurti calls about the choiceless awareness. So many ideas overlap and many interesting things keep happening. So the subject is we. It is the most interesting subject, and everybody should be interested in himself or herself more than anything else. But the unfortunate thing is we are interested in 100 things apart from ourselves. Rather than trying to find out who we actually are, we are consciousness. Thank you so much, Professor Kutty.
Thank you.
So
Nice meeting you online.
tomorrow we have the concluding valedictory session. And Swami Shuddhidananda, who is the Adhyaksha of Advaita Ashrama Mayavati, will be talking about the harmony and the synthesis of the four yogas. We're talking about yoga all the time, and the four important parts, Jnana Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Raja Yoga, and Karma Yoga particularly. And Vivekananda proposed integral yoga. Aravinda also took it forward later on. The combination of the four yogas, which is, according to Swami Vivekananda, the most important and practicable thing in the modern world. He wrote a beautiful line with which we end today's deliberation. He wrote in a letter, I want to give them, the Westerners, I want to give them hard, dry reason, jnana, soaked in the sweetest syrup of love, bhakti, cooked in the kitchen of yoga, Raja Yoga, and made spicy with work, so that even a baby will be able to digest it. So tomorrow is that talk. With that, we end this long 19-day session. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Shanti Harihi Om Tat Sat Shri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.